Thanks for joining us today. I super appreciate you being here. It's Monday, and it's good to know our weather today is not much different than what Tanya's experiencing in Florida. So that's actually kind of cool. Anyways, thanks for being here. Just a couple of things, just for some information. I will put the check-in link for today's session in the teacher source check-in link in the chat just toward the end of it. So just let you know, by all means, don't let me forget, but I'll do my best to make sure you all get it before our session's over today. And just a couple clarifying things. This session is specifically geared to a very specific group of folks at each school. You have to have the Canvas admin button in order to have access to Dropout Detective. Some of you don't have that button yet, but you went to the training. So just to clarify things, you need to have the Canvas admin button to access Dropout Detective, but you also had to have gone through the Canvas admin training, which is really short, like 15, 20 minutes with me, to get that button. But you also need to have filled out a security help desk ticket request. So somebody in your school would have filled that out, including maybe the principal himself, which requires a admin approval. And then there's a Google form to be completed for the Canvas admin button. The reason why is we're trying to automate this process. There's so many of you, just because there's more than one school, and there's just myself and Brian, and we're trying to make this an automated process. And so right now, some of the process is manual and a bit cumbersome. So please be graceful as we're trying to move through that process. So if you're like, hey, Chris, I don't have a Canvas admin button at all. Our last training was an hour ago. For the rest of the year, we'll be doing more training in January. So you can access that, but you will not see the Dropout Detective button access at all until you go into that training. And then as far as who, our school principals, vice principals, our school counselors, grad mentors, student success managers or student managers at the middle school, I think we're called, and school psychologists, and I think I mentioned school counselors. So that's like this group of 5. So we're not rolling out like a phase 2, and that will be more like the AVID coordinators. And there will also be 2 other folks who have very specific groups of students they support. For example, a special ed teacher might have a caseload of 50 or 60 students. That individual will have training in January, and they'll get a custom dashboard. So Tanya is going to talk to you all because you're at that 40-foot level. And some of you will have, just to clarify, our school counselors will get their own dashboard in Dropout Detective designed for you and the students you oversee. The rest of folks who fit in that realm, you'll more than likely get access to a grade level dashboard. And then we'll be creating custom level dashboards later on. And I know it's a lot of information, I apologize. So if you have any questions, please put it in the chat for me or send me an email. If you're like, oh, Chris, I shouldn't be here. Well, if you fit the first group, hang out. If you don't have access to the Canvas admin button, that's no stress. We're doing more training later on. So this is not meant to be a stumbling block. It's just that we have to process this because there's so many, and I'm talking like 400 people times 54 school or 40 some schools. So that's where it's challenging. So anyways, feel free to email me or drop some information in the chat. The last thing real quickly before Tanya takes off, I'm going to put inside the chat, this is called our Dropout Detective Google question and answer document. Feel free to ask questions in the chat. Tanya's amazing, and she'll be able to respond to those questions as she goes through her process today. But you also can look at this Google document that has been collecting questions from friends who've been joining us over the past week. And so you can definitely look at those questions or even post your question there. And then at the end, Tanya and I are going to look at these questions to kind of help potentially respond to some that she hasn't been able to respond in the live session. So anyways, I'm going to put myself on mute, and I'd love for Tanya to introduce herself. And I just want to say thank you for being here today, friends.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. And everyone, my name is Tanya Johnson. I am the Business Relationship Manager with Aspire EDU, and today we're going to be learning about the technical aspects of Dropout Detective. Now, one thing I'd like to say, because it's come up in a few sessions that we've done, last week we held 3 sessions. This is just one of many tools that will be available to you, and this is not replacing any existing tools that you have at this time. And so please don't get concerned about that. That is not what's happening today. Today, you're just here to learn about the new Dropout Detective tool, I'll walk you through what it is, where to find it. I'll walk you through the page that you're looking at now, the dashboard. We'll talk about how you access those grade level dashboards. We'll also look at a student profile, and that's behind each name that you see here. You will see the ability, you'll be able to click actually on that student name, and it's going to pull up a profile for you where there will be additional information. There's an overview page, there's a notes area where documentation can be captured, there is a history tab as well as a contacts tab. So there's some more details that you'll be able to gather as a result of having the Dropout Detective tool. All right, and so I'll be stopping periodically as we go through the training today. But as Chris mentioned, if you have a question, it's a burning question, you just want to make sure that it gets captured or addressed, feel free to jot that in the chat. Or once I stop periodically, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, feel free to do that as well. All right, so what is Dropout Detective? For those of you that don't know, haven't had any exposure to the tool before, it is a student retention and success solution. And what I love most about Dropout Detective is that it integrates seamlessly with Canvas. So there's no having to remember another password. There's not another URL that you have to memorize to log into. Everything is going to be accessible right within Canvas. And with Dropout Detective, what we're doing is providing a risk index of how likely it is that your students may fail one or more of their courses. The way that Dropout Detective is doing this is through a proprietary algorithm, and we're looking at past and current behavior of students to try to predict that future performance. So we're pulling together different reasons that a student might be at risk. And then we make it very simple and easy for you to quickly go through that student's profile to identify what might be happening with that student. What are the areas where they may be struggling? And then you can determine whatever appropriate intervention strategy that you want to put into place for your students. Now, as Chris mentioned, the only way that you're going to gain access to the Dropout Detective tool is going to be through Canvas, through the Canvas admin button or the admin shield. And the area where you're going to find that is going to be on the left navigation, the far left navigation, right underneath your account button. You will see a button that looks like a shield with a key in the middle. When you select that admin button, you'll then be given an account option. That would be for your building site. You would select that particular account. And then on the inner navigation menu, you're going to be looking for the Dropout Detective link. When you select that Dropout Detective link, it is going to populate a dashboard like what you see here. Now, Chris mentioned several roles, such as principals and vice principals, Canvas facilitators, grad mentors, counselors, right? All of the various people that support student success. Well, in some cases, some individuals may have the ability, when they click on that Dropout Detective link, to see the dashboard of all of the students at that particular site. This would be probably true for, let's say, principals or vice principals, right? They'd want to be able to see all students. And they might also be those individuals that have access to, say, a grade level dashboard. Now, the way that they would get to that is right here in the middle, there will be a drop down selection, and all students will represent that you're looking at all of the students at the institution, or you might be able to select just that grade level dashboard. Now, for someone like a counselor, you're likely going to just see those students that you are assigned to work with. So whether it's a counselor or a case manager, maybe you're working with a group of 30 to 40 students, then your dashboard would just be comprised of those students that you're working with. All right, because you wouldn't necessarily have a need to see the entire student population. And then, of course, as Chris mentioned, as time goes on, if there are other users with other groups such as AVID or ELL or SPED students or students that have a 504 plan or an IEP plan. Those could potentially be things that may come down the line. I know that Chris and Brian are looking at those, but as of right now, as he mentioned, the grade level dashboards and then counselors are going to be the priority. The reason being is that there's a lot of hands-on work, manual entry that goes into creating a personalized dashboard. And you're talking about a district of 24 schools with only two people trying to accomplish that. And so, if you'll just be easy with Chris and Brian as they work to get all of this coordinated, and then eventually there will be people at each site that will likely have the ability to create dashboards. They'll be trained on that process. And when that time comes, then you should see a broader rollout of being able to see students in different groupings. Chris, did I cover that well enough?
No, that was perfect. And then our goal is in January is to create 2 dashboard managers per school, 1 to 2. It doesn't have to be 2, but no more than 2. And they'll, like Tanya had mentioned, be able to help create custom dashboards for certain other roles that fit outside of the ones we're having today.
Fantastic. Thank you for that clarification. Now, I'm going to take a pause here because I know I covered a lot about what Dropout Detective is and the admin level that is needed to access the dashboard. What initial questions do you have about those two pieces that we've covered? All right, doesn't look like there's any questions just yet, and that's fine. If you think of one later, just jot it down, or when we take another break, feel free to ask at that time. Now, the important thing about Dropout Detective is with that integration that I talked about with Canvas, is that we only perform an update once per day. So if you're looking at a dashboard and you were to scroll down to the bottom left, I'm trying to highlight this area for you, you will see a last retrieval date and timestamp. And that lets you know that as of that date, 12/14/2020 at 3:03 a.m., that was the last time we pulled in student data. And I'm mentioning this because when we pull in that data, it remains static. It doesn't change until we perform another retrieval the next day. That's important to note because there might be an update that takes place, such as a teacher that performs grading. If they were to go into Canvas right now and they were to update their grade book, that information would not be reflected in Dropout Detective until that next retrieval were to take place. And so this is important to note. Now, there is one area here, this last contact column, which I'll touch on, that does update in real time. That's one of the few pieces that, and then obviously notes that are entered that are documented about students, and we'll cover those two areas. Now, I talked a little bit about the algorithm. When we are pulling in the information from Canvas, the system is analyzing those pieces. So we're looking at things like the overall grade that a student has, and we're looking at things like the missing assignments that a student might have. And we're rolling that into one number that is the risk index score. And this is across all courses that the student is taking. So that is the huge benefit of having the admin level access because what you're seeing is that holistic 40,000-foot view of that student's performance across all of their courses. Now, the system is going to assign a number that ranges between 0 to 100, and this is consistent across the board. It doesn't exceed 100. And then it places students in one of three categories: high, medium, or low. And one of the things that I like most about Dropout Detective, aside from not having to remember another password, is the fact that it is an intuitive system. So I'm sure that many of you can probably just look at this screen right now and tell me which students fall under those three risk categories: high, medium, and low. And that's how we wanted it to be. We were intentional about that because we wanted the system to not be so cumbersome that you shied away from using it. We wanted it to be easy, we wanted it to be accessible, and we wanted it to be user friendly. This way, you're able to quickly come in, see what's happening, and then move on to the next student. So it's all about creating priorities for the day and those students who need that highest level of follow up and attention from you. Now, when you see students in that high risk index category, they will be presented to you in the color red. And these students are ones that are already failing one or more of their courses, or they are falling behind um, pretty pretty badly in one or more of their courses. Especially for early on in a term or semester, that student could already be exhibiting signs of struggle. These students are ones that are going to be those high priority cases. And these are likely going to be those students where you're continuing to put resources and support in place that help to, just usher that student along, help to guide them, help to encourage them. For those students that fall into the medium risk index category, these students are on the fence. And that trajectory is showing that if they don't make some improvement, then they might be inching closer toward moving into that high risk index category. Now, these students will likely be ones that you're going to employ any early intervention strategies with these students to get them focused, get them re-engaged, and get them back on that path to success. And then for those students that fall into the low risk index category, they're presented in green. These students are academically in a good place. They're doing what they should be doing. There's no concern of them failing. You might want to give that student a pat on the back. And you certainly want to just keep a pulse on where that student's at to ensure that things continue to move along and progress along with that student. Now, there's a question about what does the 0 to 100 correlate to? It is only available within Dropout Detective. It is the risk index score itself. So that range is from 0 to 100. And the range for each category is as follows. High will be 30 to 100. Medium will be 16 to 29, and low will be 0 to 15. So it's not a score, it's not an overall grade or anything like that. It's just how likely is this student um, potentially going to fail one or more of their courses. So it's just a risk index score. Think of it sort of like a credit score, if you will, where depending on different factors like how long you've had your credit and how often you pay your bills and whether or not you're paying off the balances or if you're carrying a balance and are you exceeding the amount of credit that you're carrying, then those are all factors that contribute to that credit score. And the risk index score is similar in that fashion, in that that proprietary algorithm is analyzing those different data pieces to identify where a student will fall. Now, behind each student's name, I mentioned that there's a profile with additional information. And the overview tab, which is the first tab that you'll land on by default, that tab will be the area where you'll be able to identify what some of those areas are where students may be struggling that go into the algorithm. Okay. Now, in terms of the additional information that you see here on the dashboard, the trend column, very helpful information. The trend column is going to show you how the student's risk index score has changed in the past 7 days. This information is coming directly from the History tab. Again, the History tab is within the student profile. And here you can see there are some students where that risk score is going up. You can see with others, the risk score is going down. And the way that it works is if you see a risk index score going up, that is not a good thing. That means that student is becoming more at risk now than where they were 7 days ago. Where you see that risk score coming down, that means that that student is less at risk than where they were 7 days ago. Now, in cases with like Harper Nevin and Harper Jackson and Jacob Evans, even though that risk score is coming down, they're not yet out of the woods because they're still in that high risk index category. So there is still work to be done. But this is where you can continue to encourage those students to make those incremental improvements so that they can eventually move out of that high risk index. And we're not pulling anything from Synergy. This information is only coming from Canvas. Canvas is going to be our only integration point. So we don't speak to any SIS systems. There are so many. Some are homegrown, some are like Synergy or Genzabar or some of these other big name SIS systems that schools will use. And unfortunately, it would be really challenging for the company to integrate and ensure consistency. So by integrating with just the LMS, that gives us a more consistent platform from which to pull information that benefits all schools. Right now, the other thing that you'll see here is the last contact column. The last contact column is the one of the areas that I mentioned updates in real time. So this lets you know the last time a note was documented within Dropout Detective. Once again, behind that student profile, there's an area where documentation can occur. And if documentation is captured, then it will display the last time that happened. And I would expect for many of you, as you begin to gain access to your dashboards, you're going to see a lot of blanks. That is fully to be expected. If there have never been notes captured within Dropout Detective only on a student, then you would expect not to see any information in that last contact column. But as notes are captured and entered within Dropout Detective only, then you will see that information start to pre-fill, and then it will let you know when that last happened. And that might be helpful, especially for a counselor or a psychologist that might want to review what was the last documentation that may have happened with this student. That might help them to identify a little more context into situations that are occurring. All right. Now, a couple other things before I open up the floor for some questions is you do have the ability to filter right here from the top of the page. So let's say that you're coming in for the day and you want to prioritize which students you might follow up with. Then you have the ability to do so. You can look at those high risk students, the medium risk, and then the low risk. You also have the ability to search for a student. So if you're looking for a student, and let's say you have multiple pages, there's only 20 displayed at one time. So let's say you have 45 students that you're working with. Well, you may want to just search for a student's name. Well, you can do so through that search function with the first or last name. All right. So with that, I'm going to open up the floor to see what additional questions you have. All right. It looks like there's a question that Chris typed in. Is the last contact an indicator of when a student last accessed Canvas or submitted work? No, it's not. As I mentioned, it's related to the last time a note was entered within Dropout Detective in the Notes tab area. If a note was proactively typed and entered and saved there, then that would capture the last contact. Students do not have any access whatsoever to Dropout Detective. So this doesn't connect anything with the students' last access, but we'll talk about what you'll be able to see there.
Well, I'm just in the maybe the individual who asked the question might want to clarify, but I perhaps potentially think it might be, does it relate to access in Canvas versus Dropout? I don't know. And I know you're going to address that too. So
Tanya, I have a question. Can we manipulate what the dashboard uses to create this index number? I know you said it grabs a few pieces of info, but grades themselves are very inconsistent in the way teachers do them. So could I just say, you know what, I only wanted to capture missing assignments and ignore everything else? Does it have that flexibility?
There's some flexibility that can be tweaked, but this is the algorithm that's used across all schools that utilize Dropout Detective. So it's consistent in the numbers that you see and the overall risk factors that we look at. Some of the weighting might be able to be tweaked. That's something that the CEO of the company she would look at with Chris and any other administrators that need to look at that because it's being used across the board for all of your institutions at the school district, not just one institution. And we aren't able to cater to just one sub account within that overall school district.
Okay, thank you.
So
You're
Tanya,
welcome.
thank you. This is Diane. And so my question that I typed in, so if teachers don't put any grade marks in Canvas, which we use our grade marks in Synergy, not Canvas, will this work? And will the risk indicators work if no grade marks are used?
If there's no grades pulling in, then it's not going to be as accurate. So it will have a reflection of none instead of a grade for a student. And so it won't be picking up consistently those areas where a student may be falling behind. And I know that that's something that has been brought up a couple of times. Some teachers wait until the end of the school year to input grades. Chris may want to speak to that just from an overall school district philosophy on what the you know expectations are moving forward, I should say, for that. And then it looks like Doug, I know you have your hand up. I'm going to give Chris a moment to answer that, then Jonathan, then Doug.
I do know, and I think it was Diane. I think you asked the question that our grading practices across this district well, quite honestly, our grading practices across the district are just not the same at each school within each teacher. And I definitely don't want to spend time addressing that because it's nothing necessarily new, but I feel like our goal is for teachers to be able to give scores and feedback in Canvas. We haven't changed our philosophy since day one. That's been our goal, is to allow teachers to use it as a grade book of record. I'm sorry, apologies, to use it as a grade book of evidence of learning in the day-to-day, the paper grade book effectively, and then still be consistent with Synergy practices. So if a teacher is not giving a score value in Canvas, there is going to be other factors like submission dates and other things that are still going to be factored in. And again, kind of like Tanya mentioned at the beginning, this is not a replacement for anything, nor are we trying to replace anything, but it is another data point that we feel that school principals, administrators, and everybody else here could use as another way to kind of just say, hey, how are our students doing before those report cards come out? So I hope, my goal is in the end to be more consistent in how we're using Canvas, scoring, feedback, and all of that to kind of help make this program grow and be successful for what it's designed to do. So that's all I have right now to say, and definitely, we're definitely able to chat about it later for sure. So.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. And then Jonathan.
Hi, hi, Tanya. Thank you, and Chris, thank you for putting on this training. I was wondering if you had a breakdown of how the academic indicators are calculated and like what's weighted more. Say attendance is weighted more than time online in Canvas versus grades. If that's something that's published, and if this data set or this readout display is exportable, and like if it's associated with, say, student IDs or something like that. So currently we have systems that pull in Synergy data and display it, but if we can integrate both, I think that could be helpful. But it would just be good to understand what academic indicators are used and calculated to display this information.
Yep. So on the student profile page where we're going to see the overview, you'll see what some of those indicators are.
Great.
The exact weighting of what those things are, that's part of the proprietary algorithm that I don't know. That's the CEO's secret sauce, as she calls it. In terms of the other pieces of the algorithm, there is a summary document that we will be sharing as part of that FAQ. That gets compiled and finalized and sent out to everybody to ensure that everyone has the same information at the same time about what's happening there. So that is the extent of what can be shared, just given the intellectual property nature of what we're dealing with here with the tool. But on the overview page, you'll get a pretty good sense of what those factors are that we're looking at.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I was glad to hear that there's the student individual level of summary as well. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're very welcome. All right, and then Doug.
Sorry, unmute. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, my question is kind of similar to what everyone's been asking. We don't use grades or attendance in Canvas. And so with that, I was wondering, maybe you'll address it, but what academic indicators are then pulled if we're not using grades or attendance? So.
Yeah, and attendance is not a factor in regard to our algorithm. So once again, that's one of those pieces where a lot of schools just they have lots of inconsistencies with how attendance is tracked and captured and what have you. So that's not part of the overall algorithm. If it's based on the mastery learning book, I know that there is still an overall grade that is being calculated by Canvas in the background. That is the information that we're pulling in through that API retrieval process when we're pulling data on students. But if no grade is ever entered, then you would expect that to just reflect as none. It's not going to display anything. And so once again, that goes to the accuracy of what you'll be able to see for each student if there are those types of inconsistencies with grading practices. And so it's not something that Dropout Detective can solve. It will have to be something that is addressed at each school. As Chris mentioned, there's a lot of inconsistencies with grading across the board. And so it will just have to, I think once everyone has access to the tool, they've had some time to utilize it, come together to identify what might be the best options for that. So I know that's not a direct answer or response to what you're asking, but um, with so many different institutions under one school district, you can imagine that that's a big shift. It's going to be a big paradigm shift if you're moving towards full adoption of Dropout Detective.
But Tanya, just to clarify, we don't use attendance. That is correct in Canvas. However, I think, and you maybe shared already, but Dropout Detective does track at a click when a student actually engages in a class, right? Like that to me would be potentially in attendance, not necessarily taking attendance.
That is correct. We do look at when a student has accessed the LMS and when they have accessed their course, but on a traditional attendance basis to mark present or absent, that is not something that's factored into the algorithm. And then it looks like there's a couple of other questions here. How would we use this differently, more efficiently than the early warning system in Synergy? That's not changing, Lori. So that's not something that is being removed or changed. And that was one of the things that we were speaking to in the beginning, that Dropout Detective is just yet another tool. Though Dropout Detective has the ability to create alerts, alert notifications, it is not a feature that your school or the school district is using at this time. And so you will continue to use whatever early warning system you are using with Synergy. And then the other question is, can a teacher's lack of consistency in Canvas impact risk index? George, you've probably identified the answer to that is yes. If teachers are not grading consistently, if you have one teacher that does utilize the Canvas gradebook and they're updating that more frequently than another, then once again, that would be an impact to what that risk score associates for that student, because there's just not enough information across all of those various courses to accurately identify that risk. But as time goes on, as adoption is greater, as Canvas adoption is greater, then you would expect that to begin to, make some improvements along the way. But right now, a new tool, just there's going to be a lot of, I'd say, change that comes along with that. At what pace that happens, I'm not sure. Once again, you're dealing with a very large school district. All right, I think I got all of the questions. So let's go ahead and move into looking at a student profile because I think this will help to solidify some things for those of you wondering, well, what are some of those factors that go into that risk score? So we talked about things like overall grades as well as missing assignments. Again, you're going to see the last time the student logged into Canvas, so that will provide you with a date and timestamp. You're also going to be able to see all of the courses that a student is enrolled in. That will be very helpful to be able to see that broad view of what's happening. And again, based on the different permissions that one might have, there are some course relevant links that you'll be able to click, such as clicking on the course name would launch the course content. This might be helpful for individuals that are helping students to make up missed work or helping them to comprehend an assignment that they must complete or a syllabus. And so this gives you that access. And then you have the ability to still toggle back and forth between Dropout Detective and the course itself without leaving Dropout Detective. So that is very helpful. Now here you're going to see the overall grade that a student has in the course. And remember, if there are no grades that are being pulled into Canvas, you're going to see the word none. It's not going to have anything to display. But if grades are being pulled into Canvas, then you're going to see this information displayed, and behind each grade is a hyperlink into the gradebook. And this is where we talk about the student's academic performance. So looking at that past academic performance, here we're going to see the student's previous assignments. I can tell you that Lucas, just by quickly looking, that he wasn't optimizing all of the points that were available with these assignments. And so that might be a conversation that we can have about how Lucas can, in the future, improve those point earning opportunities. Also, if you didn't want to go into the gradebook, but you wanted to see what zeros or what missing assignments the student has, then here's where you'll be able to see that. So clicking on the show link is going to expand that information. So here you will see the name of the assignment and you will see the associated due date. Now, there was a question about, can a teacher's lack of consistency impact risk score? Where do I see that most happening, George, is with missing assignments, especially in the beginning of a school year. If course content is being copied over from one term to the next or one school year to the next, sometimes those due dates are not updated. And oftentimes, at the start of a new school year, you see all of your students in red, which is not how it should be. They should all be in green. They should all be at 0, day 1 of the new school year. And so that's an indication that those due dates are from the past and they should be updated. And so that can have an impact on a student's risk score from that perspective if those due dates are out of range. Now, when it comes to missing assignments in general, we have our own definition of what a missing assignment is, and it is not the flag that you see within the Canvas gradebook that lists an assignment as missing. For us, an assignment that is a missing assignment is one that is published. It is one that has points attached to it, so there must be a value of 1 point or higher. It is one that has a due date in the past, so anything prior to today, that the student did not submit, and that the teacher has not entered a grade for. So again, if it's a published assignment that has points attached to it with a due date in the past that the student did not submit, and the teacher has not entered a grade for, then that will be displayed as a missing assignment. Now, if the teacher comes in right now, and for these 3 missing assignments, they enter a 0 for each one of those, what you will see happen tomorrow when we pull in that new information is you would expect to see 0 missing assignments in this column, and then you would see 4 assignments that have a 0 attached to them. And then, of course, the overall grade that Lucas has in the class right now at 74.4 would not be what that's displaying is not accurate. With those 3 zeros, we can expect that that grade is going to decrease. Now, by how much, it depends on what percentage those various assignments are worth within the grade book, but it will be lower than 74.4. Now, the other thing that you're going to see is the last access. This information is showing you the last time the student accessed each of their courses. And then by clicking on that date, it is going to pull forward the access report. So here you'll be able to see the various areas within a course that a student has clicked on. You can confirm whether they really accessed a quiz. You can review if they have any struggles that maybe they're not bringing forward to you, such as a student who looks at an assignment several times without making a submission. Well, that might uncover a deeper issue that's at play, that that student's just too nervous or timid to ask for help. And so this might be a way for you to engage that student and find out if there's something going on here. Maybe they just need some tutoring support or some additional resources in place. Now, the other thing that you're going to see, in addition to that last access, is the latest submission. So when did that student last submit a gradable activity? I also mentioned that Dropout Detective is not student facing. So there's no way in which we put any information to students with Dropout Detective in terms of any of the tabs that you see here. And they don't have a link to Dropout Detective that will display their progress, nothing like that. It is not accessible to their observers. So if they have a parent or guardian that has an account, they do not have access to Dropout Detective. But we recognize the value in being able to follow up with students, especially as you're looking at information each day. And so here you have the ability to send them a message by selecting Send Message, and that will pre-fill a new outgoing message with that student's email. And then you would put in your subject line and the content of your message, and that will send out a Canvas message. Also, within Canvas, those of you who are familiar with setting up your account, part of that account setup requires you to go to your settings and to register and confirm your email address. You can also do the same thing with other communication channels, such as your cell phone number. So if your student has also done the same thing with their Canvas account, then we are going to pull in those communication channels, such as their email address, such as their cell phone number. And if you click on any of these links, it is going to launch your email system. So I think Chris said you guys are using Gmail. So if you click on that email address, it will launch a new outgoing Gmail message. It will pre-fill the email address, and then you would add the subject and the content as you would any other message. Now, here's what I want you to know and keep in mind. Dropout Detective does not in any way capture those communications that go out through Canvas Conversation or through email. These are only links for your convenience to be able to send a notification out to a student. So nowhere does it get captured. It's not part of the last contact or anything. In order for that last contact information to be displayed, you must come here to the Notes tab within the student profile, and you must enter data directly into this text box. Once you've done that step and hit save, that is where information gets tracked within Dropout Detective. It's going to provide a date and timestamp. It's going to show you the author of the note. And if you are coming in from the admin button, keep in mind, it is not going to display the course information. It's going to display a dash. That's intentional. There's no course to tie that activity to, since you're going in through the admin button where you're looking at all courses. And then, of course, the note information is what's going to be captured. All right. Now, it looks like there's a couple of questions here, so I want to make sure that I address those as I'm going through. Where did the percentages that were shown on the student screen come from? It's coming directly from the gradebook. So whatever the total information that showed within Canvas, that's where we're pulling that information in to Dropout Detective on that overall grade. And we are not able to display a 1 through 4. We use the traditional markings, the numerical values that you would see. And so that's that information that is displayed here instead of a 1 through 4. And again, for the learning mastery gradebooks that are being used, Canvas is still utilizing a grade, an overall grade. So if a student has 3 out of 9 points or, 1 out of 16 points, then it still calculates that as a percentage. And that's the information that we are pulling into the API when we pull in this grade information. All right, I think I got all of those questions that came in. And then to go back to Jonathan's question about raw data and where to be able to pull some of this information, I didn't forget that piece of the question. All of the pieces that you see here on the overview page, as well as the risk score that you see on the dashboard, that information can be pulled in through the reports. There is a statistics CSV report that is a raw data report that will have things like the student's name, their SISID, their email address, and it will have all of the other pieces that we saw on the overview page. So there will be a row for every course that that student is taking. It will show you the number of zeros, number of missing assignments, as well as that login activity to the LMS, so Canvas, into the course itself, so that last access, as well as the latest submission information, which is LDA, last date of activity. And so that is the information that will pull in to that raw data report that you'll be able to see. Also, if you have access to a dashboard view, let's say that you have the 10th grade or the 9th grade or the 12th grade or whatever that might be, then there's going to also be a dashboard statistics CSV report, which is only going to be for the students who are part of that dashboard. So it's going to pare it down based on those students who are part of that dashboard versus the statistics CSV, which is going to be the entire student body. You may not need that information. That information does not, we don't pull anything in from Synergy. So there's, once again, no connection whatsoever between Dropout Detective and Synergy. All of our information is coming just from Canvas. All right. And then the other piece that I wanted to show you, looking back at the dashboard, is when we talked about that last contact column, I entered that note for Lucas Peterson, and you see here how that last contact updated to reflect 4 minutes ago. So based on when I created that note within Dropout Detective, then that lets us know that 4 minutes ago, that's when something was entered within the notes area within the tool. All right. Going to take a pause here. It looks like there's another question. Yes, Chris. So the question is, Chris said that some teachers have work from last year, April 2020, in their Canvas courses as published. Will this have an impact on Dropout Detective? It will. If the student didn't make that submission, then it could be picked up as a missing assignment. And so that's something that I would check. If it is a published assignment and it should not be reflected, then I'd say unpublish those assignments so that they do not get pulled in to the Dropout Detective tool. All right, now we're going to go to the History tab, and I just have these last 2 tabs are really quick, and then I'm going to open up the floor for some final questions. On the History tab, this is where I told you the trend information is coming from that History tab. Well, on the default view, which is the daily view, you're going to see the student's risk index score and how that changed over the past 30 days. So you can begin to hone in on any specific dates where you started to notice a change. Was there a change in the student's behavior or grade? Did you notice something happening with that student around a particular date? And then did you see any type of impact to their risk score as a result of that? This will help you to pinpoint that, fine tune that. Here, dates where you see the silhouette, that just means that a note was captured within Dropout Detective. It's only a visual, doesn't do anything, there's no link or anything like that. And the reason we display it is because some schools liked being able to see on dates where I tracked outreach efforts or interactions that I had with the student, I wanted to be able to see if there was any positive impact to that student's risk index score. And so this visual will help you to identify that. The weekly is the same information, but instead of 30 days, now it carries it out for 30 weeks. And so you'll be able to see for that time period how that student's done. And the trend information is coming directly from here. So remember, Lucas had an increase of 14 points in that past week. And here's where we're pulling that information from, right from this weekly filter. The grades, lots of schools love this. Here you have the ability to see the students' overall grades for each of their courses. And if you hover over any point on the line, then it will show you on that date what course, what the overall grade was in that class. And so this can be really helpful. And if this gets too busy for you, you can select hide all and then just click on a specific course, and that'll pull that up for you very easily. Now the last tab, the contacts, this is going to display all of those important people associated with the student. Now we've talked about dashboards, custom dashboards. Part of that custom dashboard process is the ability to designate an ally. So in cases with people like counselors or perhaps those grad mentors or student managers, they may be identified as an ally for a student, which means that their contact information will be displayed here. Now, the other people that you'll see, instructors. So who is the teacher for each of the courses? You'll be able to see their names, their contact information. And then observers. So any parent or guardian that has their account active with Canvas, you'll see their information. That will provide you with their email address if it's listed. And then for each of the individuals, if you click the envelope icon, that will launch an outgoing Canvas message. And then there are group email functions. So if you wanted to email all observers or all instructors or all allies, you can do that. Or finally, if you wanted to email everyone that you see on this page, all allies and instructors and observers, then you can do that. It's going to put all 9 email addresses in one outgoing message, and then you can send off a notification that way. And that takes us through Dropout Detective. I know we're butting up close to the time of this session. Chris has pasted the link for everyone to check in for attending today's training session. And Chris, any thoughts, words, feedback?
No, I just put the link in, and I know some of you've had great questions. I mean, the questions you've asked today have been very similar to what we've gotten over the past few days. So, and they're great questions. And some of these questions lead to more questions. And in some cases, I don't have the knowledge or the experience to be able to listen to. And so we're definitely trying to capture those questions. I definitely think that we're in a place where Dropout Detective will have some growing pains because, like we've pointed out, we have some, and I don't want to call it inconsistent, meaning it's a negative. We know we have some different practices, and we're going to do our best to try to make this program work as successful as it can. And again, we're not here to replace or take away from the usefulness of what Synergy is by any means. And I don't want to ask Paul on the spot, but if Paul, if you want to just say anything, I totally welcome your experience. Paul and I have been working for years, and Paul and us were piloting this last year with Paul's team and a little high school. And Paul's got a lot of experience with this, and he's worked with Tanya and Dropout Detective as well.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, these are great questions. I would make a couple of comments. Number one is that this is a great tool for your behavioral health and wellness teams because it individualizes you get more data about that student than you may have if you're meeting with your counselors or what have you, and you don't have the information or you don't want to go diving in to try to figure out where stuff is. It's all here in one spot. So I think that's really handy. Number two, this is really behavior based, because at least so far in my school, it's the behaviors the students are doing, their lack of engagement in a course, lack of communication, lack of assignment submission, that really affects where they're at as opposed to mastery. And so it's not so much, I don't know how many of you have students who are failing that are engaged and have turned everything in, but we don't have very many of those. And so what we find is that because the early warning system doesn't really give us data until the marking periods, that's too late. And so this provides us on time at any point data. It also allows us to just have a conversation. So if I pull up a student and I see, some strange stuff on the dashboard, I can actually then have a conversation with that instructor and say, so in your Canvas course, it shows this. Can you tell me how you're using that, or how is that supposed to be helpful for the students or families? And again, it's just like a temperature gauge. This is not designed to give you a 1 to 4. It's not designed to talk about attendance, but it does talk about those behaviors that I think are important to catch early. And it gives you a unified place to make notes about them or communicate with the whole team instead of having to jump around to different spots. So that's sort of how I've seen it used and what I like about it.
And we are going to roll this out for our teachers in the middle of January. That's kind of our goal. We want our counselors, psychologists, we want our school administrators to expose, to look at it, to chat, to play, to explore. And when the teachers have access, again, we're not trying to hide it, which is we want some people to have some really interesting some understanding. But when teachers do get access to Dropout, it will allow, like if Paul and I are on the same team and we share the same students, it will allow Paul and I to have a conversation with each other about how the students that we both support are doing. So it's really more of a transparent way of supporting those students versus a gotcha moment, because it's really going to be up to the moment. And we've had some great questions about grading, and I know that we can't necessarily address those with pinpoint accuracy and exact answers, but I feel like this program has a lot of positives going for it, and I feel like that's really going to be a thing that we can use.
One thing that I really
Thank you for that.
is Paul's perspective about the behavior piece. Because if you look at it as a behavior monitoring system rather than academic, then it really changes the lens and makes it very useful. It's that academic piece that doesn't really align to our standards-based practices and how we're using it, but behavior, that's a great perspective. And now it opens my mind on how it can be used.
And thank you, Chris, and definitely thank you, Paul. It's been a while since we've spoken, so it's nice to see you, and I appreciate that feedback. I know that we've gone a little bit over time, so I want to be mindful of that. I've got about 5 more minutes or so for any final thoughts or questions that you all might have. So anything else that you can think of that we can address for you? Jonathan?
Oh, I was just gonna just say thank you again for sharing this tool. It looks like it could be a great support. My wondering is around how we might be able to gain a better understanding of what academic indicators are used to calculate the risk ratio of these students, simply because that could guide our intervention for the students themselves. If attendance is prioritized over, say, grades, then I would say, okay, you need to attend your classes more. Or if for instance, there's research around dropout prevention and what puts a student at risk, some research would say that failure in math would put a kid at higher risk than, say, a failure in language arts or something as a likelihood of future dropout. So, just encourage your CEO to increase, I would say, transparency around that could be helpful. I think the strengths in displaying the data is helpful, but I think also just an understanding of what is used to calculate that data, because in MTSS programs or PBIS programs, the tiers are also different than what we're accustomed to. So, a high risk student might be in that 5% tier, and then there's like the breakdown of the traditional red, yellow, green. So that could be helpful too, and how this might tie in.
And we don't, and Jonathan, I appreciate that feedback. We don't tie into any other system, which is why you're not going to see a comparison between the two. Our data is only coming from Canvas, which is why there's importance in whatever information can be captured in Canvas. Then that would be a wonderful way to be able to more accurately assess what's happening. But I think Paul made a good point. It's not necessarily just the number, it's looking at what is happening overall with this student. So being able to piece together when you're looking at the overview, you might be able to see some inconsistencies with that student's behavior of late, where it's like, okay, I see that their last submission was on the 24th, and the last several assignments, they have not submitted those. And I see that they've recently logged into the learning management system, but they haven't logged into their class. And so those might all be indications that are pointing you toward something that's happening. There's been a shift of some sort with that student. So are they disengaging? Are they pulling away? Are they struggling with the assessments that are part of that particular area that's now being covered? If it's a math class, right, has it become more challenging for them, or a biology class where it's a subject matter that they're not connecting with? And so it's not any one piece to say, aha, that's it. It really is this global view of what's happening with that student.
Okay, no, thank you. And I think I appreciate that. And it sounds like it takes a lot of factors into account. My one piece that I'm still kind of trying to wrap my head around is how I might look at a change over time and then decide what intervention has had an impact on that change based on the data displayed. So I'm looking forward to just digging in and seeing where we can learn. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate that.
Awesome. All right. I've sent everybody the check-in is in the chat. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. Tanya and I have this Google document that we'll be going over because some people have questions in the Google document that they didn't put in here today. And I feel like this is going to be just a little bit of growing pain because I already know that. So, and Diane, I appreciate your questions too, because definitely that was a question that was asked, and it's asked, I think, for the most part each time. And I feel like it's okay to ask that question because we're just going to try to see what happens here. So anyways, yeah, I appreciate all of you being here. And if you have any other questions, email us or email me for sure. And if not, you are free to enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks for hanging out with us. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful holiday season. Thank you.
Thanks, Tanya. Yeah, totally.